I wonder if any of the attendees...
Okay, wait, I'm making you the presenter.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, you're the presenter now, so why don't you try it? There it goes.
There we go. Okay, all right.
Perfect, and you'll be able to see all of the Q&A. Now let me attend to Harold.
All righty.
Okay. I sent him an invite.
Yeah, I saw that a minute ago. So.
You use...
I use whatever you just sent is what I linked in with to get here. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Harold, I'm going to switch you. Oh, you know what? I think... Hold on 1 second. I'm going to... Okay, change role. I'm going to change my role to host again real quick.
Sure.
I can't hear Harold. I don't know what's going on.
Well, we want to hear Harold. There's Harold.
I don't know if we can hear him yet.
He's not?
Harold, we can't hear you yet. No, you're a panelist. I don't know why we can't hear him.
I don't recall if last time if Harold ended up calling over the phone or if he used the computer audio. Because I used computer audio. That's what I selected.
Right. We can't hear you. Maybe dial in. Oh, wait. Harold, can you... Wait.
Oh, I see him now. He looks like he's muted, though.
Oh, Harold, can you...
Wait.
Harold.
We just heard you a second ago. Whatever you did a second ago, let us hear you.
Hear me now?
I can hear you.
All right.
Don't mute yourself. Okay.
I will not. Okay. I will not mute myself. So.
And there's already a bunch of people on the phone, so just take care.
Okay.
All right.
No,
you wanted 2 polls, but I can't remember. I have to figure out how to do a poll here. Okay.
If we can do it, I think it'd be great. If we can't do it in the beginning and you figure it out at the end, we'll figure it out at the end. So, Barbara?
Yes.
I thought after I was thinking about jumping in fairly early on and asking some questions about, when you say, do you have a problem? What is the problem? About the property management questions of, is it a tenant selection problem? Is it a rent collection problem?
Right.
Is lease enforcement or behavior set of problems?
Right.
Or is it a resident problem? Within the residence thing, to sort that out.
Sure.
Okay. So
you can jump in wherever. We can have this be mostly more of a conversant type of hour as we go through. So feel free to, let's just make it a conversation, so to speak. I'm fine with that.
Okay. I just wanted to tell you a couple of things I would.
Yeah.
Then another question that I was going to throw in is, does it matter who owns the eviction prevention program?
Right.
You talk about the importance of a champion, but does it matter where in the organization that sits? So we could just sort of kick that one around a little bit.
Okay.
And I don't think you talk about your availability or Champlain's availability to put on trainings for others. Do you want to?
I mean, mostly that's been in partnership with other organizations, so like with NeighborWorks or things like
Right.
that. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, we're certainly open to exploring that. I know Janet and a couple folks and I are going to try and have a conversation next week, because apparently a few organizations have said, like, oh, we'd love to have like technical assistance and somebody that we could have either come visit us or spend a few hours kind of solving specifically.
So maybe at the end we could throw that in as a thing that people are interested to see how they respond to that as well.
Sure. Right.
Okay. And so on the question of percentages of eviction rates, we never, no, I've not seen anybody publish any kind of standards. Have you?
No, that's actually been a big discussion, and Margaret Posick and I had a big discussion about those different rates, because like for CHT, they're actually really quite small. We only have a handful out of, a couple thousand homes. There's usually only, less than 20 in a year, maybe 12, 13 even, more average. But that's when we're talking about those, we also look at the difference between, are they for cause or are they for lack of payment?
Right.
And that gets out. But, I actually put out a poll and said, does anybody know their basic rate? And people said, oh, it varied so much. And I've not really been able to have anybody put their finger on and say, oh, in these areas or in this context, it's, 2% is considered good, or anything more than 5 is considered tragic, or, I haven't found anything along those lines.
Okay. Well, we can ask folks on the call if they have any such. Good. So, Ginny, you'll let me know, or you will jump in and tell us when we can do, or if we can do a poll.
Yeah, I'm playing with it right now, and for some reason, they keep changing the software, and then somehow it changes it, and the way I knew how to do it, it doesn't happen now.
I can relate to that.
Is right.
The other night I was trying to sync up my iPhone to my computer for iTunes for music, and all of a sudden my phone completely froze up. It wouldn't do anything. And it said, the computer sent a message, I need to update the software, and I tried to update the software, and now the computer couldn't find the phone at all. And the whole thing just sort of came apart. And of course I always...
Why did I start doing this?
And of course my rule of thumb is when something like that happens, the very first thing you should do is panic.
Yes, indeed.
I find that to be the best thing to do. So the next morning at 5 minutes before opening, I was at the Apple store saying, help! And I was incredibly lucky. I walked right in. They gave me a person right away, and they just went through and restored it. And they said the problem was probably a faulty cable that I was using to sync.
Interesting.
They weren't sure, but I went back and looked at that cable, and I had another problem with it. So I think it might have been. And they said if you buy cheap cables, not Apple expensive cables, that happens more often. And it was true. That was a cheap aftermarket cable.
Wow. Well, it's 1:58, and people are still on. And I can't figure out how to do the polls, so I think what we'll do is we can ask people if they want to share information about their housing. If they have a eviction prevention program, they could always type it into the chat.
That's what I'm going to suggest that they do. It'll be a little bulky for us to figure out that way.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting to know how many people have a program and how many people have it as a resident service program, and how many people see it as a property management program.
Right.
So I think I will ask folks up front.
Victoria.
Hi, I'm just hopping on a webinar. I'm out for the next hour and a half.
Harold, tell me that's your ringtone. Harold.
That's for Robin.
Your oh my God.
Oh, that's too funny.
Too funny. Oh my God. Oh, somebody wrote, nice ringtone, Kimosabi. So, Harold, you provided the entertainment for today.
Well, I always need a ringtone that's really distinctive, otherwise I never pay attention. And that that one always gets people's attention.
Yeah, it certainly does. Well, it got the audience's attention.
Well, I have put it on silent, so I trust it will not
please
do that again.
Here we go. So it looks like we're right at 2.
Okay, you want to?
Yeah, we usually give folks, we wait like a minute or two after 2, just because people are still, but, so just, I'll lay the groundwork. I'll just do some quick kind of, housekeeping rules, and then I'll turn it over to you, Harold.
Yep.
And I think what you can do is ask your question. Harold, are you able to see when people write in Q&As?
I see the chat, so if it comes from everybody to everybody, I should see it.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what folks should do. Well, you could ask your question and just say that they could type in things that. Okay. Okay. All right. It's 2:01, so why don't we get started? Hi, everyone. This is Ginny from LISC. We are bringing you today's webinar, CHAM Webinar, discussing an eviction prevention program. So I'm going to make Barbara the presenter here, and she's going to be introduced by Harold Nassau of CHAM, but just a few housekeeping issues. Everybody's muted, so if you want to ask a question or respond, send in a Q&A or a chat. This is being recorded. This and the PowerPoint will be put up on the LISC website after this session, and we are asking you to take a short survey at the end so that you can tell us what other topics you would like us to bring to you and to help us make better, our programming decisions. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Harold.
Thanks, Jenny. So I want to welcome everybody to this webinar. I'm Harold Nassau, Director of Asset Management at NeighborWorks and President of CHAM. And we at NeighborWorks and the other intermediaries have been working at eviction prevention now for about the last 6 or 7 years. And we have seen this effort grow from an isolated set of visionary folks to becoming a best practice and a standard. I would estimate that of the 150 multifamily groups that in the NeighborWorks network, that upwards of 60 currently have formal eviction prevention programs. And we're even beginning to see the growth of eviction programming in the for-profit market as well. So the crossover between our mission outcomes of the people that we serve who are struggling and the properties that we serve that we want to make them succeed has brought together asset management and resident services and property management under the umbrella of eviction prevention. And we'll be spending a fair amount of time today talking about that. And at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about the upcoming CHAM conference, which has actually 3 sessions that touch on this interaction and intersection between the 2 bottom lines that we serve. So before, we had hoped actually to use a polling function, but they changed the software on us. So we're just going to ask you all to use a chat function to send us a comment on how many of you have an eviction prevention program. And if you have one, is it located primarily in resident services, or is it located more in property management? And we'll then tabulate those results, not as efficiently as with the polling mechanism, but understanding where people are coming into this is increasingly important. One of the leaders in the field, in our network and in the industry, has been Champlain Housing Trust. And Barbara Garys from CHT I'll be turning it over to her in a moment, but CHT has been doing this for quite a few years and has developed a toolbox and an education program to help formalize the programs that we're all practicing. So with that, Barbara, I think I'll take it over to you.
Great, thank you very much. And you're right, it really is sort of a topic that's been evolving quite a bit. And Champlain Housing Trust does a lot of different things. And eviction prevention has definitely been something that we've really moved into. So for the scope of today's presentation, really what we want to share is a bit of information about operating an eviction prevention program. You're going to see on the PowerPoint EPP used quite a bit, and that's that's talking about an eviction prevention program. We do also want to provide some basic information about how could you structure a program, because there's more than one way. We want to give some examples of what programs we've done and try and give you a little bit of insight either into creating a program if you don't have one, or potentially revising an existing program that you may just want to work with. It's a really key thing to know that the webinar and the discussion is really focusing on evictions and non-payment of rent. And that this program and some of the programs we're talking about really aren't addressing the lease violations or cause evictions. It really is focusing on the non-payment of rent. So just to put some clarity there. So, there's a lot of you looking right now. 129 people have signed into this webinar. And, take a moment and think about why would we be so big? Why don't we think about and sort of be done with
Barbara, it's Ginny. Barbara, it's Ginny. I'm getting a lot of feedback. Are you on the phone or using a headset?
No, I'm just on the computer.
Okay. Or Harold, are you muted?
I will mute myself right now.
Because people are emailing me and I hear it too. Yeah, I hear a lot of feedback. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I hear a lot of background noise.
Yeah, and everyone should be. Hold on, What?
So Harold just muted, and all the background noise went away from my end.
Mine too. Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Well, that just means Harold was the problem child. But Harold, if you want to jump back in at some point, unmute and come on back in the conversation. All right. So to continue on, Champlain Housing Trust does have an eviction program, and ultimately we're sort of doing it for three primary reasons: mission, money and modality, and message. And for us, we're a nonprofit housing organization, so for us, our mission is to create and support safe and affordable housing. Certainly every organization, nonprofit or for-profit, you need to have funding. And so having an eviction prevention program really allowed us to diversify some of our services, and that diversification actually increased the funding for the education program, and additionally it was able to decrease some of the costs in property management and to really create some stability for the people that we are creating housing for. And then finally, we really want the message to the community to be that we are more than a landlord. When we really think about eviction prevention, for those of us who are mission, we know that if we want to invest into financial stability for our residents, that we want to make sure that our tenants that we have who are struggling perhaps have an opportunity to get a reprieve. And in that reprieve, we at Champlain Housing Trust, when someone signs up for our On Track program, we basically give them a pause in the eviction process. And that pause is to give them an opportunity to meet with a financial coach, to think about what options exist, to try and come up with some supports, and really give them a chance to think about it rather than just quickly react and maybe come up with a plan that they're not actually going to be able to implement. And that's really what we're looking for, is those workable repayment plans that people are successful with. Certainly for those of you on the property management side of your agency, decreasing operational costs associated with having rental arrears or bad debt, all the different costs of eviction we'll look at in a moment. And really just retaining tenants, right? That's a smart thing to do, is to try and have a stable tenant base. And then really we're looking at two different things when we're talking about a cost-benefit analysis. We're looking at the dollar, right? That decreased vacancy, loss over people moving in and out, the turnover cost, all that sort of thing. But we're really also talking about the benefit we get for our reputation within the community. So when Champlain Housing Trust was really looking at creating our program and then going back to looking at why we were doing what we're doing as we were developing our program, we really were looking at time, and that was one of the things that came up a lot. When people get evicted, it takes time, right? People have to show those apartments. You have to have admin staff who can process applications and do all the things around getting people eligible to lease up. You've got to have the property managers who actually lease them up, all the things that go to finance and accounting. There's really a lot of people involved in keeping folks housed. And what we found is that if we were able to use the on-track program to keep people successful in that home, it allowed people to save time, and then time is money as well. So, those vacancy loss, the turnover costs for marketing, all of those other things certainly can decrease over having an eviction prevention program. So there's that financial savings that you can potentially get. For us, one of the big things we were trying to help, especially, were what we call the start and stop evictions, where someone gets far enough behind, we start the eviction process, they scramble in whatever way that they do, they'd come back and get caught back up. Well, we've already sent them to the attorney, we've already started paying some attorney fees to start the legal process of eviction, but then they get caught back up. So we've spent, a few hundred, perhaps a few $1,000s, and the eviction doesn't happen, which is a good thing, but we're trying to find the way to get in front of that so that those costs aren't wasted, not really helping the tenant and not really helping the agency. And then, as I mentioned before, we really want the broader message to the community to be that we help house people, and you don't want to be that landlord, the one who's always kicking people out or evicting people. So we've really found that the community message has really served us pretty well, and we've actually been able to bring several community partners on board by trying to partner up with them in as many ways as we can. I'll admit that I'm a little partial because I do work in an education and counseling program, but we really do think that for a lot of our tenants, education can be a really strong foundation, and that working with someone either in resident services or in education and counseling really is giving them another person besides just the property manager. So you're kind of bringing in extra people to give them some different support. And that sometimes the resident services staff or those education and counseling staff can really create a meaningful intervention, really kind of working with people to meet them where they're at and come up with a functional budget that really focuses on their short and long-term goals, and that really gives them a way to be successful. And then finally for us, that mission we've talked about a lot of times as a nonprofit, we really want to sustain safe housing. And Champlain Housing Trust has really taken a very large step into working on reducing homelessness in our community. And what we're thinking is that if we're evicting them and they're not able to be successful in one of our apartments, perhaps even with a Section 8 subsidy, where would they actually go next? And there's not a lot of choice. So for us, we really also felt like that this is making inroads into helping reduce and prevent some of that homelessness that people end up dealing with. So eviction kind of has two sides of a coin, and really as a necessity, it is something that's driven by state law. It's really necessary to preserve the property rights that we all have. We want to have a clear, deadline-driven legal process to regain the property should we really need to. I mean, we have a duty to our investors, to the organization, and perhaps members to collect rent, to have a strong and solid business line. The other thing that it does is it puts the tenant on notice that they've got to do something, right? There is something required of them. And sometimes a late notice doesn't have the same impact as potentially a notice to vacate or an eviction summons. So it is a necessity, and we understand that, and we don't want to take away the ability to have evictions when they make sense, when it's really purposeful and needed. Because as a problem, evictions can really be sort of this blunt legalistic object. It's really not providing help or assistance at that critical time. And unfortunately, sometimes we can create the opposite of what we want, which is panic. And so if someone's feeling anxious or panicked or upset or frustrated, they may choose to do nothing, which is really the opposite of what we want them to do. We want them to spur them into action to resolve the situation. And for those of us who might be working within an organization that is nonprofit, it could run afoul of your mission, right? Again, I said earlier, our mission is to preserve safe and affordable housing. And so by having on track and preventing those evictions, we're really sort of leading up and engaging fully in that mission. So it's also key to understand that there is not one version of an eviction prevention program.
Barbara, can I just ask a couple questions?
Yes,
So in trying to decide whether or not you need an eviction program, as opposed to whether or not you want an eviction program, going back to your necessity question. So do you analyze your tenant selection process first to see if the problem is one of resident behavior or tenant selection?
So we certainly do have a screening process at CHT, and we do look at people's credit, and so that's a little bit of information about their history of paying debts and taking care of credit. We do also look at their income, and we do have some limits on what percentage of income can go towards housing. Optimally, we like to see people at that 33%, but we will on occasion let people go up to 50%. But, we haven't really seen a correlation of, people who come in as renters, with these demographics generally tend to be the ones who get behind. We do find there's a pretty big difference why people end up coming in to On Track. And a lot of times they come into renting from CHT, 40 hours a week, fully employed, or maybe even a couple employment incomes in the household, and then someone loses their job or hours get reduced. One of the things we noticed early on, we had a lot of folks who were working either in retail or like home health aid, to where their hours would get reduced, maybe dramatically for a short period of time and then back again, so they'd fall off. So we really weren't able to see like a correlation from when people came in. It usually was changing events after they got in.
I think that's really important to note that the common issues that tip people over can happen to people who meet all your rental criteria, even if those criteria are relatively stringent. That the average person in our housing will have an event every 2 years,
right,
that will tip them over and make them unable to pay their rent on time. And a very high percentage of those people can be stabilized through a program like yours.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of different reasons. We also see folks who have Section 8 who might work different hours, and their Section 8 goes up and down, and they're not exactly sure what portion that they owe. There's a lot of different reasons that people can end up struggling, and we know based on several different reports and studies that have been done that most people can't even cover a month's worth of their expenses. So if some catastrophe happened, if they became injured or something came up in their household, most people don't even have a month's worth of savings to get themselves, 30 days of reprieve. So usually one thing happens and they are immediately struggling, just immediately. So, all right. So that's where I think it is important to think about, the people that you're bringing in. And you may realize, and we know that in our portfolio of homes that we have a lot of different people. We actually have open market apartments, and those folks are paying market rent, and their income is significantly higher. We have project-based, where people are simply paying 30% of whatever their income is to be able to be housed. So, we are dealing with a lot of folks in different scenarios. We also cover a really large area. We have a 3-county area that includes the largest city in the state of Vermont and the smallest town in the state of Vermont. So we have Burlington area, which is really urban, and then we have a lot of really rural areas. So that is really something to think about when you're thinking about whether you want to do a program, is what would that look like for you? And to think about what's the size and scope of your rental portfolio. Do you have some existing resident services? What do those look like? And what are you already doing to sort of address or support tenants who may have some financial difficulties? So really, for anything, the first step is exploration, kind of going in and being curious. So one of the things that we found when we were creating our program, and as we've talked to lots of other organizations who also have programs, one of the key elements people said was to get insight from a wide cross-section of people, as well as your community partners, because it really can be a challenge to reconcile the needs and priorities of all these different stakeholders in a way that works reasonably well for everyone. I don't know of anyone that's created a program that works absolutely perfectly for everyone involved. So kind of thinking about that exploration and what are the steps that you need to do to go forward. And that's really where that program design is going to come into play. So taking the time to do some exploration, thinking about the development of the program, and then going ahead and launching that. So we're going to break that down just a little bit more. So the first thing is you have to figure out who wants to be a player, who wants to come into this conversation, because you're going to need a group of people, especially if you're going to have interdepartmental or cross-departmental engagement, or if you have a third-party property management organization that you hire. Maybe you own the apartments, but maybe someone else manages them, and they're not managed internally by your own organization. So really thinking about who needs to be on the team would be who are the people that are involved with eviction right now, who are the people who could or should be involved, and trying to get those people together, because it's from that group you're going to be able to define what the problem is. And the problem could look really differently depending on different portions of your portfolio. We certainly saw that there were some of our housing developments that had a higher percentage of people who were facing eviction or late on rent than others. And so by looking at who's on the team, defining what the problem is, then you can really kind of determine your target audience and when are you going to actually invite them or engage them. So some organizations like CHT, we just chose to say, we're going to invite anybody who is 10 days late. So if you're getting that 10-day late notice, we're going to invite you to come to On Track and meet with a financial coach. We certainly know of other programs, especially programs that have lots of apartments, that said, we're going to just target it on this project. So, Winchester Place, that's, we're going to offer it at this one housing site and we're going to start there. Again, there's really not a right or wrong way to do it, but it's a matter of thinking that through. Because once you've figured out who needs to be on the team, you kind of have an idea of the problem and you know who you're targeting and when you want to reach out to them. That's when you can actually really start to define the person.
Barbara?
Yeah.
Hi. This is another area I'd love to get input from folks on the line.
Mm-hmm.
Is if whether or not you all have a sense of what a high or eviction rate is, or where you begin to think you have an eviction problem. Mm-hmm. I've heard of portfolios with eviction rates as high as 13%, which is enormous. I've heard of about a good number of them in the 1 to 3% range.
Yeah.
And if folks on the phone have thought about what that is, either by property or by portfolio, as a kind of red flag to start really worrying about it, not just from the people point of view, but from the real estate point of view, the systems point of view, to really focus on. So if folks could use the chat function to tell us a little bit about how you identify the problem from the management side, as well as from the resident family side, the experience side. Thanks, Barbara.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, and that's one of those pieces, is you want to try and get as much information as you can, and that's why, we were mentioning earlier, you may have one property in your portfolio that tends to have a different experience than another, and so that may make the most sense. That may be a property that has a lot of vacancy loss and a lot of turnover loss and a lot of arrears that get left unpaid as the tenant leaves. So, that may be what makes sense for you, and having some of that information certainly is going to help you think about how you're going to do what you're going to do. So it's thinking about those things that are going to help you define that program, and then really think about what your desired outcomes are or what you want them to be. And that's something that's key to think about. That may change over time. CHT started out really focused in one area, and about a year and a half into the program, we decided we wanted to start looking at some different outcomes, and we felt as we got more information, we needed to shift that. The other thing, of course, we all need to do is, none of us have unlimited budgets with all the money in the world. We need to do everything we need and want to do. So sometimes your program is going to be defined a little bit about the resources that you have available. So you may want to think about, are you using a grant to start this program? Are you using money that you're allocating from your property management budgets? So it's really thinking about those resources so that you can build a program that really works with the capacity that you have, the capacity for your staff, the capacity for your funds. And then one of the things we often say is you kind of have to dive in and launch the program. A lot of times we learn by doing, and there's often not that perfect time where everything just aligns and everything's great and you just know this is the moment to launch. Trial and error is really an okay thing. So for Champlain Housing Trust, we really have these two different departments, property and asset management, home ownership center. Everybody has a limited amount of time, energy, and money. And one of the things that really came out of some of our early discussions were that we actually might all end up with more time, energy, and money if we're each doing a portion of the eviction prevention program rather than one side of the agency taking it on completely. So we were really pretty lucky that we had already had a foundation. The education program and property management department had already started working together way back in 2011. We started a program called Ready, Set, Rent. and that was really using financial education and coaching to help people rent up if they had credit issues. So On Track was just sort of a natural evolution of that. So we were really fortunate because we had already had some of that interdepartmental foundation, and we had a grounding of communication and staff that were already working well together. If your eviction prevention program is the first time that you're endeavoring into interdepartmental or interagency experiences, that may be something that you want to put a little more time and effort into to make sure everybody's coming at it from the same page. This is one of my favorite concepts, I'll have to admit. I really love the idea of champions of change, because I think in our lives, we should all be able to wear a cape at some point and another. And that really you may want to have one or two staff members, or maybe more, who really have the vision for that eviction prevention program, who are really committed to kind of champion the program. And so these champions of change would be people who are really enthusiastic. They can articulate the value of the program to other people, both inside and outside the agency. These would be folks who could sort of think critically and problem solve effectively. And then really to be able to work collaboratively with a lot of other people, even when opinions differ, because they certainly will. And again, a lot of times if we're trying to bring resident services in with property management, in with education and counseling, or any variation of that, people are going to come at things from a different angle. And I know some of our early times we were like, why is this happening? And we'd hear from property management, oh, our process is for this, or that's an RD property, so we have to engage with people in this way because there's rules and guidelines around those properties, or tax credit properties. So you really want to make sure that, those champion of change, regardless of what department they're in or what their tasks are, that they're really able to work with a lot of different people, because these are going to be the folks who are going to lead some discussions to really try and plan out the program so that you're going to create something that really works for everyone. So the next step is really figuring out who some of those champions are and then trying to assess the organization. Hey, girl.
Barbara, does the champion really have to be in the resident service side, or could it be a property manager?
No, honestly, we say this a lot when we teach the conferences we do, that a champion of change can be anybody. It really doesn't have to necessarily be like a CEO or people up at top. It really could be anyone. Optimally, if you had a few different champions in a couple different departments, that would be like the optimal type thing. But it really can be anyone. It could be simply a property manager. It could be a director of the department. It really can be anybody.
Great.
Yeah. So if we're sort of leading into looking at assessing the organization, and this is one of the things that Champlain Housing Trust did early on, is we really wanted to look at, what resident services were already out there for people. Because we do have an education and counseling program, we had already had some financial capabilities programs that we were offering. And so we really needed to look at those and see, well, what would we need to add to be able to do eviction prevention? Because it really is a finite service that we're offering for a very particular need. We really needed to look, too, were the managers and department heads really ready to invest into the eviction prevention program? You do have to have some of those folks on board, or it just becomes an uphill battle that you're not going to win. So nobody really wants that. The other piece that we know is that change is really hard, and that sometimes you're going to have folks who might be a little resistant to new procedures or new responsibilities that come from an eviction prevention program. And so it's important to look at your property manager, those folks who have the boots on the ground, dealing with the people who are coming in. We know that a lot of our property managers said in the beginning, oh, we can't add anything more. Like, oh my gosh, please don't ask us to do more than we're already doing. So one of the things we had to really do, again, is make sure that we had some good communication around what we were asking the property managers to do. And once they realized it really was quite finite, and actually, for a lot of them, they figured out it was easier to have a couple conversations with the financial coach who was doing the eviction prevention assessment than it was to actually try and come up with a couple different repayment plans that weren't working, or hounding the tenant to try and even just get them in to come in. So our property managers, we did have a few who were resisting in the beginning, But fortunately, I'd like to say I think we've if not gotten all of them on board, at least most of them. And then, as I mentioned before, you do need to think about the resources to invest in starting up the program. There are some preliminary costs, but not a lot.
Barbara, I know obviously it will vary very much with the size of the program, the nature of the services, but could you share with us a little bit about the number of people that you serve and the number of FTEs or staff that Champlain uses to serve that number of families?
So Champlain Housing Trust has about 2,000 apartments or co-ops within its portfolio. I believe there's about 14 or 15 actual property managers. There's lots of other staff doing applications and other things. In our program, for the education program, we have our admin coordinator, who's the person who's sort of that first entree that people send that registration back. We only have 2 counselors, though, so we have just the 2. And then I manage the program, and we have an AmeriCorps. So even with some finite staff, we were able to put on a pretty good program. We have about 80 people who come through on track every year, somewhere between 50 and 80. As our program has been around longer, we find that number keeps increasing a little bit each year. We have one financial counselor whose primary role is to do the on-track program. So it really kind of focuses a little bit on that one financial counselor taking in all the different folks who are coming in for counseling. They're generally with him for about a 3-month window of time. And then we engage each property manager. So when someone comes into us, they volunteer. That's the other piece that we determined early when we were assessing what we wanted to do. We decided it needed to be a voluntary program. We could not mandate or require that someone had to do on track. We felt that would not work. So it's a voluntary program that people send in the registration if they want to participate, and then they're able to meet with that counselor. And that gives them that pause in the eviction process to meet with Eric, who's our counselor, to come up with a plan of action. And
Barbara, it's Jenny. Your voice is fading.
Okay.
Did you move her?
I didn't. No. Well,
okay,
I think
so that's better.
With Harold muting and not muting.
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Barbara, that's very interesting. If you serve 80 people out of about 2,000, that's about 4%.
Yep.
So, as a kind of maybe benchmark is too strong a word, but a way of framing what we're dealing with here, that we're looking at not 80 evictions, obviously.
Correct.
But 80 situations that could include people who are going to get evicted, there may be others who are not in your program, and people who will be in the program who will not be evicted. So it is certainly not a measure of the whole eviction process, but it does give us a little bit of a handle of the universe that we're thinking about. That's great.
Yeah, great. So I think that leads us into really thinking about then what would be some of the benefits and what would be some of the risks. And, you know, I've been in my position for a little over 15 years now, and I've seen a lot of things change. You know, when I started here, all our education program did was draft home buyer education. That was it. We did nothing more. And now we do financial literacy, we do rental counseling, we do delinquency and foreclosure, homeowner services. We really expanded. And it may be the same for you. Some of you may have had, you know, property management, and that's all you did. You just simply managed the properties, and then you may have had some resident services, and those may have expanded over time. So really with housing, we certainly know that being innovative and willing to try new things has some risks as well as some benefits. So we had a training a while ago, and we actually asked a lot of our participants what they would view as some benefits for those who had programs or were running to start programs. What were some of those reasons? And these are some of the things that they came up with. And, you know, we talked earlier about decreasing costs or increasing funding. So I think that's an important thing to look at. The other piece that came up is we talked earlier about kind of including a lot of different people. Someone had mentioned this, that helping tenants stay housed might actually help your property managers have a bit of increased job satisfaction, or maybe decrease some of the stress or anxiety they feel. And that may actually help you increase the retention for the staff that you have. I'm going to give you a quote at the end of this PowerPoint. One of our property managers saying, I'm not in the eviction business. I'm in the housing business. So if you're having, for that organization to have, the 13% or whatever eviction rate, that would have to be pretty tough as a human, on that human level. That's got to be tough on the property managers. Additionally, sort of satisfying your client or tenant needs through some personalized support services certainly is going to help you increase positive outcomes. The other piece that we found is that this was really sort of a new business line for us and created some different market opportunities. We've actually had some of our private landlords in the area ask us if they could send their folks to us. Now, we are not at that place at this moment. We are still only serving CHT tenants. But, in the future, perhaps that could be a fee-for-service type of business line. I've mentioned a few times that opportunity to work interdepartmentally or interagency. What we've seen, certainly in the education program, is that sort of having our product or services diversified has really made us a lot stronger and much more competitive for grants. And that's been huge for us. And then finally, someone from our agency brought this up, that the community really has a targeted focus on homeless reduction, and that this program really supports that getting better. So on the other side of the coin, unless Harold, do you have any questions or thoughts around that? So we'll go on to look at some risks here. So, one of the risks you always have of trying anything new is there's no guarantee that you're going to get a payback. Or if you get a payback, it may take some time to get there. So it may actually cost you a bit more in the beginning than you actually save. And that's something you have to look at within the budgets for your organizations and the different departments who are going to be providing that service. One of our other participants had mentioned there were 2 or 3 property managers in their program who were really not on board with the program, and they actually were doing some sort of sabotage behaviors and sort of talking the program down and not really helping the program move forward, and that really became problematic within the organization. So that's where I mentioned earlier about trying to think about the different people involved and who might be impacted, and really try and make sure they understand what your expectations are so everybody's on board. And just like anywhere, if we have to move resources from one place to another, we knew we wanted to do eviction prevention, so that means we might have had less opportunity to spend time maybe on some of our home buyer education programs or other things. So we had to really decide where we wanted to put time and resources and try and find a way to balance that for our whole program. And one person mentioned they really wanted to do this, but when they found out what it would take for them, what people they needed, what time was required, that was something that they just didn't have the capacity to actually start it. And if they couldn't do it well, they really didn't want to try it and have it fail simply because they weren't prepared for it. Sometimes different department or agency needs can be in conflict, right? Property management needs this, resident services needs this, and they might differ. So how do you find that common ground? We can also see that individual people, especially those in positions of power, might have some opposition with direct service staff. So in some ways, you kind of have to have everybody on board at least a little bit. So if your folks in the executive team are completely on board and your direct service staff isn't at all, that dynamic's probably not going to work, and neither would the converse of that. So trying to get everybody on board to some degree is going to be important. And then the other piece is to look outside your agency at the broader community and to think about, is this eviction prevention program going to be supported by the community? Is the format the right format for the community's needs? We actually had quite a few conversations with some of our partner agencies, especially those that provided rescue funds for folks who were delinquent. We wanted to make sure our program worked in tandem with theirs, so that was really important for us. So sometimes, this didn't come up one time. So sometimes things go off the rails. So if they do, don't panic, right? Sometimes you just have to reorganize your structure just a little bit. And this is where that champion of change can really come into play. When we started our On Track program, we were actually in the beginning having monthly committee meetings. And within those committee meetings, we had the director of property management, we had the assistant director, we had the director of the homeownership center, myself as the manager, we had our financial coach, Eric, who was there. We also had a couple property managers and resident services people. So we had this small, well, maybe not that small, we had this group of people who were getting together really regularly because we knew going in we were going to have to try some things on. And, you know, just like if you're going to go out and buy a shirt, if you put it on and you say, oh, I don't like this color, I don't like the way it fits, you take it off and you try something else. And we kind of felt that way with our On Track program. We knew that we may have to try it on in a couple different ways, a couple different sizes, a couple different colors before we really found out what worked. So kind of be prepared for some challenges to come up, know that they will, but have identified a process to kind of deal with those. And for us, that was the committee. Although now that we've been doing this program for about 5 years, we really actually don't have the committee meetings as much as we used to. We really only do twice a year, that big committee meeting, and we have a small group of 2 or 3 people who meet each month to talk about the functioning of the program. So as we looked through, knowing that things change as we go along, we really had to continue to look at what it meant to prevent eviction. So somebody came into On Track and they got that pause for 3 months. They did their coaching. They made a plan to, you know, pay their arrears back. Is that preventing eviction? Like, was that it? Are we done? Maybe not, because we really don't just want them to be there for the next month or 2. We want them to be there for longer. So you really have to think about, how are you defining success? How are you defining failure? And then think about those benchmarks. The other thing I'll mention about benchmarks is it's really important to think about the database or databases that you have and you use. One of the things that we really had to come up with is, how are we going to collect the information? The database we had in education at the time wasn't really good for that. The database they had in property management, not good for that. Resident services didn't work for that. So we actually came down to ye old spreadsheet. Since then, we've actually gotten a better database, and so everything goes into ours, which is a good thing. So we had to evolve past that. But databases are going to be really important. How you keep that information is going to help you assess whether things are going well and what you need to shift or change, if anything. So when we were coming up with the toolkit, Champlain Housing Trust was working in partnership with JP Morgan Chase and NeighborWorks to really try and come up with a toolkit. So we were able to author a toolkit, and I'm going to give you some information at the end about how to get that, to really help people similar to yourselves who are thinking about doing this or thinking about improving their programs. And 4 key factors that came out of the creation of that toolkit were to think about success does not exist in silos. So as an agency, really trying to think about the integration of the people and programs that you have, the philosophies within those different programs and the systems, the structure of how things get done, and then to really think about the protocols that you use. All of those things trying to come together can be really complex, but if you can get them to integrate, it can end up being a really important thing for your organization, and actually can be quite rewarding sort of on every level, on the tenant level, on the resident services side, on the property management side, on the education and counseling side. The second one is really talking about innovation, that new programs that address the existing issues in really new or original ways can sustain or increase that funding that you may have available to you. It could be an attractive way to get new funding to come into you. So I don't know of any organizations that don't want to increase revenues, because when you have the revenue, you're able to optimize the services and programs that you offer. So again, it's okay if you need to start out small, because that's where your budget is, and then you can potentially grow from there. The next one is that outcomes are important. Trying to think about the data that you're gathering in a really purposeful way, because the information that comes out of the metrics that you're gathering are really going to be telling to help you figure out if what you're doing is working, if you need to just continue on and give it a chance to sort of get settled in the community, or do you need to shift something if something isn't working. And to keep in mind, we saw this at CHT. I look at certain points in data and go, oh, this is so telling, like this is so meaningful. And the property management side of it would look at it and go, oh yeah, that's nice, but this is really like so important to us. Because the final thing is that you need to be able to articulate the success of the program, and that metrics that you're gathering and the way that everybody understands them are going to help you do that better. And I mentioned this earlier, that sometimes you just have to jump in. We definitely learned that experience was a good teacher. We had some things at the beginning we thought, that was a brilliant idea. We were like in love with certain things. And a few months in, we were like, why are we doing that? Like, that is so cumbersome, and nobody likes that. So we had to just kind of go back on a monthly basis and look at what we were doing to fine-tune it. As recently as yesterday, we were fine-tuning our invitation and registration for On Track. So that kind of keeps going. So Harold, is there anything you want to add here before I go into looking at some of the things that have gone well and some of the resources available to people?
Not really, Barbara. We're running a little short on time, so I'll just let you just continue for now. Thanks.
Okie doke. So a couple things we've learned, that we really were able to strengthen the working relationships between the property management department and the homeownership center, which is where education and counseling live. We were really excited to have some, cutting edge services to better serve the people who live within our homes. And that for us, being able to show the funders that we were able to adapt. And I'll even show you an interesting way that we came up with a new funding stream for education and counseling. For us, we also were able to seek feedback from really everybody, from the participants, from the property managers, from the folks in the homeownership center, and that really allowed us to adapt the program to be what it needed to be. And that really consistently including people really was important in the overarching structure of the program to keep it solid. That we have seen a positive impact on funding. So from the initial onset in 2015, we did get a grant from NeighborWorks to design and implement the program. It was a pilot for 1 year, and here we are in 2019 continuing that on. One of the things that we were really pleased to find out, especially community foundations, banks, and credit unions, were really willing to support financial capabilities programs. So for us, I increased the budget for education and counseling by about 20%. That was pretty significant because we were able to go to some of those community foundations and those lenders to increase our budget for financial capabilities. So that was actually a huge fund for On Track. As we were able to start the program, grow the program, and solidify the program, we were then able to look at the property management side and say grants are fleeting and they're not always consistent. And if we really want a consistent program, that we needed a different way to make sure it stayed funded. So our property management side said, well, what we can do is we can take a portion of $2 per apartment per month and set that aside into a fund to pay the education and counseling team to be able to provide the program. So we're a line item in the budget for property management. So depending on whether resident services would do that or who in the organization would, we found that innovative interdepartmental funding allowed us to keep on track as a consistent program, so it wasn't dependent on grants coming or going. Additionally, we were able to kind of diversify our counseling portfolio. We're also really seeing that people who've engaged with us in the On Track program are also much more willing to come back and do other education and counseling services. So it's a really good entree to get people into other programs that you may be trying to engage them in. And the bottom line we found with On Track, if we're saving time and saving money, we have a lot more time for mission. And as a nonprofit org, that's really important to us. We also were really able to look at how people were paying their rent and how were they addressing their arrears after finishing that 3 months of coaching, financial coaching. So we really were looking at 4 key things: that the tenant signs a repayment agreement or pays in full to initially avoid eviction. That was that first level. And that about 68% of the folks in On Track were able to do that, which was brilliant. The next one was we were looking at the past due or the arrears to at least remain stable, so not increasing. We actually had a group that we were looking at as a contrast, and so we were able to see that people who were late at one point and hadn't done On Track, generally the arrears were continuing to climb, versus the people who had participated in On Track, their arrears were decreasing over the course of time. And ultimately what we were looking for is that third one, that they've paid off the arrears entirely and then remain in good standing. And that was a huge thing that we noticed with On Track. It wasn't just paying down the arrears, it was that after they completed the program, they were far more likely to pay their rent on time going forward, and the longer they paid their rent on time, the better they got. So the longer out from the program, the consistency of on-time payment remained really strong. And that finally what we were looking for is that when the tenant chooses to move out, that they leave with a zero balance, what we call the MOWAB, or move out without balance. And that's really what we were thinking, those 4 key elements to see how people were doing. So we had a couple of things that we asked. I'm not going to read these through, I'll give you a chance to sort of look at them, but we always are trying to take into account different people's perspectives. So we were asking our tenants why it was important, and really said that she just needed the guidance to get through. We asked one of our counselors why they thought this program would be an important program, and then ultimately her response was that we need to use the platforms that we have, because where we have the power, we should use it for good. And I think that that was a really important key point. And finally, our property manager that we talked to about the On Track program commented that retention was the name of the game, and that the On Track program had been really great because it really gives the opportunity to bridge the gap between the property manager and the tenant, and that it was really helping people retain housing, and that that's really the goal. So there's a lot of tools and trainings and techniques that are out there. I mentioned earlier that NeighborWorks did help create a toolkit. There's not a link for where you can get that yet. We're in the final stages. I do believe it's going to end up though on the NeighborWorks website somewhere. So I anticipate within the next month that's going to be pretty widely distributed. And again, it's an overview of creating a program, developing a program. It's got a lot of information. It also has about 20 pages of appendices, which are examples of forms that you could actually just use. So you wouldn't even necessarily have to create those yourself.
Oh, hi, Barbara. It's Ginny. So yes, once that link gets put up, I'll email everyone who's signed into this webinar.
That's joyful. That would be great. That would be great. And then next, I'm going to sort of quickly go through this, that the Virginia Center for Housing Research and NeighborWorks, Harold, helped create a great workbook that really is great for new programs, help you figure out the cost of setting up, annual program costs, move in, move out, and sort of some of the benefits. So Harold, do you want me to go to the next slide and you can kind of talk people through a little bit of this?
So starting at the beginning, when we started down this path, there was a research project that Mercy Housing did and another that NeighborWorks did that showed that teaching financial capability and focusing on eviction prevention was not a cost center, it was actually a revenue center. That taken across the board, a well-run program produces more money than it costs if you have a need for the program. So the spreadsheets here, there are 3 screens, a setup screen, an operating screen, to help you analyze what it costs to have a program and what the benefits are. So I won't take you through it line by line. It's pretty explanatory. If you go to the next slide, You look at the number of units that you have, the number of turns you have, to come up with some benchmarks of the eviction-related costs that you may save. And then on the final slide is that it tabulates for you then, given those costs and given those potential savings, how many evictions would you have to avoid to pay for itself? So if you had one prevention, that person would have to stay there for 67 months, 5.5 years, for it to pay for itself. Well, that's not realistic. But gradually, as you go over further down the list of the number of evictions prevented, you'll see very quickly that the amount of time that you extend the person's tenancy becomes very practical. If you have, this is available from NeighborWorks. It'll be available in the toolkit. The research is from Mercy and from NeighborWorks. And in the final slide, there's also a link to research done by Common Bond and done for them by Ernst & Young, which takes all the best practices that Barbara has laid out and provides some data on their experience on each piece of this. One final request I would ask of all of you, if you would tell us how many of you have a loan fund or repayment assistance fund through which, if you have an eviction prevention program, you are helping them with direct payments. We'd love to know more about that. So before we end, it's 2:59, at the CHAM session in June in Nashville, we will have a session on the impact of resident services on property management. We will have a different session on the impact of resident services and eviction prevention on the residents. And then there's a third section, a panel, high-level research panel that CHAM and NAMA are doing together, which will talk about how to put all these things together at the corporate level, kind of an organization view. It is 2:59. We don't have time now, unless we want to take a couple minutes for a couple quick questions. Ginny, can we do that?
I think I think we're out of time. But
we're out of time.
What I'll do is I will send the questions to both Barbara and Harold and ask them to respond, and then I will send it out to whoever was on the webinar today, so everyone will get the answers. And then we will be posting this presentation along with the recording on the LISC website, so that will be up there also.
That's terrific. Thank you, Ginny. Thank you, Barbara, for a terrific presentation.
Thank you both very much. Yeah, it was great. Thank you. And thanks everybody for attending, and come to Nashville. It'll be fun. Thanks, everyone. Okay, thanks, Barbara. Thanks, Harold.
All right. Thanks, Ginny. Bye.
Thank you.